our good friend Josh Reinstein, who is here. And thank you, Josh, for joining us. Josh, can we hear you? Make sure we can hear you.
I'm here. You hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear. Josh, it's great to have you here. There's probably nobody who could provide as good of an insight into the close election that we are all biting our nails as we watch unfold and unravel in front of our very eyes, as Josh Reinstein, who is the head of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus and the author of the newly released book about President Trump, his relationship with Israel, his relationship with biblical Israel. Josh, it is great to have you on. What do you think about the unfolding and the unraveling of the American election?
Well, thank you for having me on the show, Rabbi Weiss. I think that all the votes need to be counted, but it's a pretty much sure thing that Donald Trump won this election. What we're seeing is that the difference between where Trump is and where Biden is in some of these swing states are so big that pretty much Joe Biden would have to win about 80%, 75 to 80% across the board on the remaining votes to win. And I think that at this point, I know there's a lot of rhetoric and a lot of, people fighting over it. I think they should just count the votes that they have, and they'll see that Donald Trump has won the election.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And, how do you feel about the role of the media in all of this? Because I think that, there's so much. We had Mayan Hoffman from the news editor of the Jerusalem Post before, and she was, providing her perspective on the role of fake news and sort of manipulating people's behavior and their voting behavior. Is that something that you're concerned about?
Well, I'll tell you, it's extremely concerning, obviously, because they lied about the polls. Just take any of the states that Donald Trump won. He was expected to lose them. He won them big. I think he won Ohio by 8. He was supposed to lose it by 4. That's 12 percentage points. That's not in the realm of reason. Obviously, Twitter and Facebook locked down his campaign. He wasn't able to get his message out. Even when he said that he believes that he won, which any presidential candidate can say that, they just blocked his tweet. They said it's just like propaganda. And I think that that really backfired for the Democrats, actually. I think that what we saw going into the election, and the reason I was pretty confident last night that Donald Trump was going to win, is that the run-up, their plan was basically to get a buildup of votes from the early voting. So they were trying to get 70% Democrat vote in Florida, for example. Okay. Mm-hmm. In the end, they only got 48%. Now, the difference between Hillary Clinton's margin before the election and Joe Biden's margin was double in most of these states as a lead up before the actual election took place in the early vote. So because their polls were so high, it was very hard for them to get their supporters out to the polls. You have Corona, they were scared, said, look, we're winning the state by 5%. We're in the state. They said the NBC poll had Wisconsin for Joe Biden by 14%. And of course, he's up by 4% right now, an 18% swing. So people in Wisconsin who may have wanted to vote for the Democratic candidate was like, why would I have to go and vote in the middle of Corona when I'm winning by 14%? So I think that a lot of people, make these miscalculations. We see this in Israel too. Where they always say the opponent against Benjamin Netanyahu is going to win. And then the last day, everyone runs to the polls and votes for Bibi Netanyahu. I think it just backfires. So I think that it makes the media circuits look ridiculous, but also it's self-defeating.
Well, thank you for that analysis. You obviously, you know your stuff, you know your facts and figures. I want to talk about the Jewish community and Israel. And I also want to welcome our guest, General Yechiel Gozal. And General, your microphone is on mute, so make sure you unmute your microphone. Welcome to the program. Good morning.
Good morning in Israel, and I'm glad to be with you. I'm not an expert on election in the U.S., so don't.
That's okay.
Any explanation of.
That's okay. we have that part covered. But both you and Josh also, live here in Israel. And as now, you're an executive with the Friends of the IDF. So can you reflect a little bit? And then, Josh, I'm going to want you to reflect on the last 4 years of the Trump presidency in terms of what has that done specifically for the IDF? And then, Josh, you can maybe talk a little bit more globally.
Yeah.
Gozal?
Actually, from the perspective of the security of Israel, and when you say a security, it includes peace process, chance for peace, because Israel is strong, make the chances for peace much higher. So from the perspective of security, actually, we are in a totally different place than where we were 4 years ago, and even in the last 20 years. So actually, we feel so good with the direction that the USA choose to lead the process in the Middle East. We feel stronger than we were. Actually, the acknowledgement that Jerusalem is our capital put us in a totally different place in the chances to have peace. I believe that once that everyone acknowledge that his capital is the real capital, and there is no chance to change it from the point of view of our neighbors, our enemies. This was very important. And actually, you see that the relation, the coordination, the collaboration, not just with the U.S. forces, but also with the administration in the U.S., and actually put us in a totally different relation and understanding with our neighbors. Those who choose to come to a peace process understood that there is no other choice. Israel won't be out of the Middle East. Israel is here. Israel is strong. It's better to be a friend of Israel than to fight against Israel. And those who are still fighting against Israel, they're losing always.
And Josh, you had a real inside seat to that whole process of the moving of the embassy. You want to explain a little bit more about the how important of a decision that was?
Well, I literally wrote a book about it called Titus Trump and the Triumph of Israel, so I could go into it for a long time. But look, over the last 3.5 years, Donald Trump has done more for the state of Israel than any sitting president in history. And there's a long list of good friends as presidents, Ronald Reagan, Truman. My organization, the Israel Allies Foundation, made a list of the top 10 things that Israel could do that U.S. can do for Israel. And in the last 3.5 years, Donald Trump has done 9 of them. And each one of them would have been a sea change in policy. And if you go into the embassy move to Jerusalem, it was extremely significant. And I think General Gozal referred to it. It took Jerusalem off the table. It said once and for all that Jerusalem is the undivided capital of Israel. America recognized that. And you have to understand that people follow symbol. The end of the Cold War was when the Berlin Wall fell down. And the end of the war in Iraq was when the statue of Saddam Hussein was toppled. Here in Israel, when they moved their embassy to Jerusalem, that was the end of the dispute over Jerusalem.
Josh, I'm curious. What would a Biden presidency do to the to those 10 priorities, to the 9 that President Trump accomplished?
Well, I think, you can speculate on a bunch of them if he's going to undo them or do them. But the biggest one that we know would happen is that Joe Biden would re-sign the Iran deal, allowing Iran to get nuclear weapons within 5 years. This is the only existential threat to the state of Israel. It's very scary for Israelis. It's why 70% of Israelis supported Donald Trump in this election. 24 said they didn't know, and only 6% said they support Joe Biden, because no one wants Iran to get nuclear weapons. And we think that deal was, as President Trump says, the worst deal ever signed in history.
All right, well, I want to ask Gozal about the Iran deal because Gozal is somebody who spends a lot of time with American Jews and specifically American Jews who care deeply about Israel, some of whom, many of whom, the majority of whom are Democrats. Now, how Gozal, because of your relationship with Jewish Democrats, American Jewish Democrats, and because of your position within the IDF, how do you see the Biden's position when it comes to the deal with Iran and Iran's nuclear capabilities?
So I really I don't know, and I cannot predict, but I can tell you that the fact that maybe most of the Jews are in America are Democrats than Republicans, although that we saw that some movement in the last 4 years or even more. I think it started even with President Bush, the son, that more vote for Republicans. But it doesn't matter for us because we, as a friends of the IDF, those who support the IDF, those who support Israeli soldiers, we get support from Democrats and Republicans. The big two donors that support the Israeli soldiers are actually one support Democrats, number one there, and the other one is Republicans. So in a way, what bothers them, they probably vote Democrats or Republicans, some of them because of Israel, but most of them because of, what's going on in America. But if you ask them about Israel, if you ask them about, decisions about Iran and their threat against Israel, probably they will support the way that President Trump chose in the last 4 years. It was actually something that put us in a totally different world, totally different situation, totally different threat. It used to be that a real threat for the state of Israel, not the Palestinian and not our neighbors. It was number one was Iran. The fact that President Trump chose a different way than the previous president support us a lot, and I hope that next president, if it's President Trump or Joe Biden, they will continue the same direction, because what you declare before election and when you come in your place, in your position, your responsibility, and the experts around you will consult you to do something different or to continue the way that President Trump chose. And also, we have a say in Israel, because after all, we have to remember, we are an alliance to the U.S. We are the long arm of the USA in the Middle East. So, and America trusts Israel, because Israel actually maybe the only country in the world. They don't allow others to fight our war. They can support us with money, budget, etc. But actually, no American mother cry because she lost her son to protect the state of Israel. And this is totally different when we talk about so many American soldiers that were lost in different places in the world. Not in Israel. Not in Israel. Israel is doing everything by herself. So if the politics of America won't support Israel, who knows what will be the next day with the U.S. forces that maybe will have to come and to protect Israel, and this will be totally different. We saw it in Syria, in Iraq, and other places in the Middle East.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot has been talked about in this election about the role of the presidential candidates' stability, ability, health. President Trump, they're both in their 70s. Biden is 78. and President Trump obviously had Corona recently, and so a lot of people are looking to the role of the vice president in a major way in this election. And it used to be the vice president was a sort of a ceremonial position, and now if you listen to the way that Kamala Harris talks about it, everybody's sort of expecting her to be the one to continue to pick up the mantle and maybe even become the president. And I wanted to hear your thoughts, Josh, on the two, if you were to compare the two vice presidents.
Well, I don't think you can compare. I think Kamala Harris has a record of support in some cases for Israel, but in the last few years, she's really turned away from Israel. She was in the Senate, the one that torpedoed our anti-BDS legislation. She wouldn't make a resolution about anti-Semitism as well. I think that her position on Iran, on the Palestinian issue, I think they're all things of concern. Now, of course, it could be that's what she was as a senator, maybe as a vice president, she would moderate those issues. Whereas Mike Pence is the greatest friend we've ever had. He's a Bible-believing Christian. He believes that he has a biblical mandate to stand with Israel. And because of that, he's shaped a lot of his policies.
Mm-hmm. And Josh, you have a relationship with Vice President Biden, is that correct?
Yes, with Vice President Biden or with Vice President Pence?
Sorry, Pence.
Vice President Pence was the chairman of the Congressional Israel Allies Caucus, which is one of our 45 caucuses around the world. But I think one of the things that people make mistake is they say, oh, why are you so supportive of Donald Trump or Mike Pence? You have to understand, Israel isn't supportive of a political party. The party affiliation means nothing to us. We're a one-issue country, Israel. So what we support are policies. It just so happens that the Pence-Trump policies in Israel have been phenomenally pro-Israel and have led to a period of peace and stability that this region has never seen. So it's not like we're picking sides. And in the caucus, the Congressional Caucus, it's half Democrats and half Republicans. It's the issues that matter. And that's what we're standing for.
Very good point. Okay, thank you for that perspective. Gozal, can you tell us like a little bit more about about your concerns with? There's never been an election as close as this, and there's never been an election, frankly, with the president sort of making such aggressive comments about questioning the electoral process. A lot of the country is split 50-50, and the outcome is really going to depend on the complicated electoral college that they have in America. Obviously, Israel has its own sort of system that everybody likes to complain about, but America has an equally complicated system that people don't, especially in Israel, don't realize really relies on this electoral college, which we don't have to get into the details of, but the point is that it's split 50-50. And what's so important for Israel and for Israel's friends around the world is for Israel to have a good relationship, bipartisan relations, and have friends on the left and have friends on the right. And Gozal, are you concerned about that? Are you concerned about that polarization?
Actually, I want to believe that the fact that we are in a 50-50 now in the election, but if you ask the people in the USA, I think that on supporting Israel, it's not 50-50. It's probably 80-20, something, for Israel. So whoever will be the president, I think you should know, or if I may say it like this, that the people of America support Israel if they are Democrats or Republican. And it's better for us, Israel, and our partners in the US that Israel will be strong and won't allow to our enemies to continue with their wishes to wipe Israel and the US from the map. So I hope that the result will be wherever there will be, it will be in supporting Israel. It looks like easy case if President Trump continue, but if America choose differently, I believe that after all, also Joe Biden understands that it's not 50-50 about Israel. Maybe it's 50-50 between him and Trump, but not with Israel. Israel, it's much more, even if he declares something against the reality, will bring us to a conclusion that we have to support Israel.
How do you feel about that, Josh? Do you believe that when it comes to Israel, it's not 50-50?
Look, I think that we're seeing a polarization in the Democratic Party because of the progressive movement, which is inherently anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. So we have a part of the Democratic Party that is not a friend of Israel. We don't have that in the Republican Party, but we also have amazing friends in the Democratic Party as well. It's not a numbers game. It's really the individual that I've found. It's some people are willing to put their neck out for Israel. Unfortunately, one of our co-chairs, Elliot Engel, was not reelected in a primary in New York, but he stood up strong against the Iran deal. He was one of the biggest outspoken critics about it. Some people said it cost him political, clout, but he did it because he realized it was the wrong thing, and he stands strongly with Israel. So does it matter if he's a Democrat or Republican? I don't think so. It's just that there are more Republicans who are doing that than Democrats.
Okay, I'm interested in hearing about your wish list for the next president, Josh. Did you prepare one yet?
Well, there's only one more thing on our list. It's sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. I think that what you saw in the last election, a lot of people miss this, is that in the last week, he did a couple moves. One, hosting a economic signing event in Ariel University, showing that he recognizes Judea and Samaria. Two, the United States put Jerusalem, Israel on American passports. And three, he brought in, and I think most people recognize this, 3 peace deals in the last 6 weeks as well. And the timing of it is not a mistake. You have to understand his base are Bible-believing Christians, and he wanted them red hot for the elections. And the way to get them really excited about supporting them and coming out is by blessing Israel. They believe by blessing Israel, you'll be blessed. And if he curses, you'll be cursed. And I think when you look at the numbers, the actual numbers of evangelical Christians that came up to vote, I think it's astounding. He did something that no one else has been able to do. And I think he understands the formula. I think that he knows that Christians want sovereignty. And I believe, as I told you, unless something crazy happens, because the margins are so big on his lead now, that he will remain president of the United States. And running up to he's always thinking ahead, running up to the midterm elections, I think you're going to see more amazing things come out of this administration. Now, I also believe that he believes in peace through strength, that by strengthening Israel, he can bring peace to the region. And he showed that. So it's not just for the votes that he's doing these things, but I think it has a huge voting factor for him.
So that's that. What about you, General Gozal? What would be on your wish list to see from the next American administration when it comes to security, the security of the state of Israel?
I would say one thing, just to continue the same direction, the same way as it was in the last 4 years. We saw results in the last 4 or 5 months with all the agreements and peace process with the United Arab Emirates, Sudan, and others. And I hope that Saudi Arabia will be the next, because if we deal with those countries, even if they are in the second circle, I think it will send a message to the Palestinian, to the Syrian, and hopefully also to Iran, that America and the West world and Arab world, all of them, together with Israel, so it's better to go to peace than to go to war. I think that the Palestinians, they don't understand it yet. Every country that the White House succeed to bring them to make a peace with Israel will make a little change on the perspective of the Palestinian, and they start to understand that it's better for them to be with us.
That's exactly what Josh was saying. Josh was saying it from a biblical perspective. It says actually in the Torah portion that we just read that God promises that he will bless the countries that stand with Israel. And that's such a driving force when it comes to how Christians relate to Israel. I don't know if that's such a driving force when it comes to how Jews relate to Israel. I think Jews are, sort of more intrinsically connected to Israel for lots of reasons, not just one Bible verse. And that's it's funny how you're coming about it. Josh is coming about it sort of from a faith-based diplomatic perspective, and you're coming about it from an IDF security perspective, but you're saying the exact same things.
Absolutely, but don't be mistaken. The fact that the IDF and the security, it's not based on fighting about things that it's our assets. No, it's about the Holy Land. It's about the land of Israel. The existence of the IDF is to defend Israel. Israel as a land of Israel, Israel in the Middle East, Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, everything around, and the people of Israel all around the world. So actually, when I'm talking as an expert in security, my roots are in the Bible, in the Torah. So it's not different. It's the same. We won't fight on a different place in Africa or Europe like we are fighting on Israel. And that's something that until today, the Palestinian Authority, they didn't understand. We are not going to leave. We are here. That's why Jerusalem, it's not something from the last 72 years. Every soldier in the IDF understands it. We are fighting not based on the year 1948, 1947. We are fighting for something of 3,000 years. And that's something that should be clear to all our neighbors. We can live together in peace and go together back 3,000 years and understand that, the fact that Jerusalem is here and we are here, and that's it. That's something that Trump understood very well, and this is a story of Israel.
That's right. And I'd love to hear, Josh, your perspective. Josh, what is your perspective on that? Going back 2,000 years, going back 3,000 years, going back to Titus and to Cyrus.
Look, I think the main point is what General Gozal said is 100% correct. Another aspect of what we understand is that the reason we're the top military in the region and maybe the world is not because Jews are great athletes. We know that God is with us. We know that God brought us here. And even the most secular Jewish person, and especially when I served in the army, I served with a lot of secular people in the army. They know before who they stand and who's with them. And I think that if God is with you, no one can be against you. And that's also a principle that we have. And I think that people who understand that from a biblical point of view, they want to be a part of it. And I think that that's why we're seeing so many nations come together and so aptly called the Abrahamic Accords, because it all comes from Abraham. And it is part of our prophecy that one day the nations will dwell together in peace in Jerusalem.
Thank you very much. Tell us, though, about, in the last, we have like a few more minutes remaining. I want to hear about your book and about how you make the connection between the modern election, the modern political cycle that's going on in America, but with the ancient history of Cyrus and of Titus.
Yeah, in the book, Titus, Trump and the Triumph of Israel, we start with Titus. And the reason we do is because we use him as a case study. Titus destroyed the Second Temple, and he was so excited about it that he declared victory over the God of Israel. He said he beat the God of Israel, he beat the Jewish people, it's the end of monotheism, paganism won. It was such a celebration that he actually built the biggest infrastructure project of the time, the Arch of Titus, which still, you can go to Rome and see it. It depicts the Jewish people kicked out of the land and the Roman soldiers carrying a menorah from the Second Temple. Now, in his life, he believed he was right, that he beat the God of Israel. It was the end of the Jewish people, and he was super excited about it. But people who know the Bible realize that that's not true. That was actually the beginning of our prophecy, when we were going to be kicked out of the land of Israel and then brought back to the land of Israel one day. And we prayed for 2,000 years in the direction of Jerusalem for that to happen. And the same thing happens today. If you don't look at Israel through a biblical lens, you miss the big picture. And that's why not only are Bible-believing Christians such good friends of ours, but they understand the issues better than anyone else because they understand what's happening from a biblical point of view. They see the fulfillment of prophecy in Israel. And that's also why a lot of the diplomats and the State Department and people around the world, they always misjudge the situation in Israel. They always give the wrong solution. And they always think that our solutions are wrong too. So, for example, when we moved the embassy to Jerusalem, they said there's going to be a third intifada. There'll be blood in the streets. Or when Trump recognized sovereignty in the Golan Heights, they said every U.S. mission will be under attack in 22 Arab countries. But of course, it actually led to peace. Because when you do what's biblically correct and not politically correct, you lead to peace in this land. And I think that's something that Christians get. And I wrote the book, and I take it all the way to Trump and what he did in the last 3.5 years. And that's also why I thought he was going to win before I actually saw the hard data, and I was even convinced.
Josh, I assume your new book is available on Amazon? How do we get a hold of your new book?
Yeah, you can go on Amazon and write Titus, Trump, and the Triumph of Israel, or you can write Josh Reinstein in Amazon. It'll pop up. And I'm happy to say that it's been very successful, and people are not just learning about the history of faith-based diplomacy and where we are today, but what the future is. And I think that's what's exciting. More people are getting involved with the mission.
Thank you, Josh. And General Gozal, how do we find out more information about the FIDF?
I was in the FIDF from 2003 to 2009, and then United for Israeli Soldiers in Israel, and now back to the FIDF. I am the executive director in Israel of the Friends of IDF. And the most important that whoever is supporting the FIDF in America or United for Israeli Soldiers in the rest of the world is support the Israeli soldiers, support the security, the safety of the state of Israel and the Israeli people all around the world. How to do it? Just go and see the FIDF.org. You get all the information there. And it's very simple. We are all around the US and Panama and also in different places in the world. Everything that we are doing, the soldiers, yes, together. Today, you know that even in Israel, the IDF is leading the war against the COVID-19. And once that the IDF got the responsibility, we support the IDF to support Israel in the war, the front line with the COVID-19. And we have to remember that in spite of the COVID-19, we have to continue to protect Israel. If it's in Gaza Strip, if it's in Jordan, Samaria, in Lebanon, Syria, it's not quiet anywhere. And of course, working also about the second and the third circle of threats, like in Iran. We didn't talk here about intelligence, what we are doing and how we share it with the US. And that's something, for the American people and the American leadership that should know that, they have us here. And we are the front line of America in the Middle East. And we give much more than get from anyone. We are.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Lives were saved by the IDF, and that's very important because we are brothers. We are. So every penny that they give to the Friends of IDF or to the Israeli support the Israeli soldier, actually it support also the USA and support.
That's right. Thank you, General Gozal, and thank you, Josh, for joining us. And we look forward to hearing a good outcome for Israel and a good outcome from the United States. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Amen. Thank you.